Okay, so thank you everybody for joining. My name is Tal Rabina. I'm the Director of Strategy of APA, Europe-Israel Press Association. And we are very, very happy and honored to have with us for our APA special brief today two experts on the subject of UNRWA. Mr. James Lindsay, who served from 2000 to 2007 as legal advisor and general counsel for UNRWA, overseeing all legal activities of the organization, including contracts and relation with the regional entities. Mr. Lindsay also was a former trial attorney with the U.S. Department of Justice and serves as force consul in Sinai and a general counsel for multinational force and observes. With him, we have from Israel, Dr. Adi Schwartz, a researcher and an author focusing on the Arab-Israeli conflict. Dr. Schwartz is a co-author together with Einat Wilf of the book War of Return, and he is a research fellow at the Misgav Institute and a postdoctoral fellow in the Ben-Gurion University in the Negev. We'll get in just a minute to what UNRWA is and what it was and what it should be, but I would like to start with a very short question for both of our experts, and if I may get two short answers before even we start. Does UNRWA still serve its purpose? Mr. James Lindsay, please.
It serves its purpose, but it also does a lot of other things that don't serve its purpose, I guess is what I would say.
Okay, things to look for to hear and more elaboration. Dr. Schwartz, please.
Thank you for having me. So I think that very shortly, UNRWA was never an aid agency. It was always a political tool to continue the conflict with Israel. That was its main purpose. That is still its main purpose. And this is why I think it should be dismantled as soon as possible.
Okay, thank you for this two statement. Please, our colleagues, please unmute yourself. Please mute yourself so we can hear our expert. And if I just may remind you all, and especially those who was not here in our brief before, we have the chat facility. Please feel free to present any questions you want to our expert, and we'll do our best to get to you personally to ask your questions. The chat facility within this Zoom. Mr. Lindsay, what do you think? Why do you think it still has a role these days?
Well, I think it's pretty much agreed that it has a role. Even the Israeli government has said that they don't want to end UNRWA today. There's talk about ending it in Gaza after the war ends, and perhaps later in the West Bank as well. But first, I want to thank you for the kind introduction. It is, in fact, accurate pretty much. I would correct only one thing. When I joined UNRWA, I was not the general counsel or the legal advisor, which are the same job, basically. But I was one of the two lawyers directly underneath the head of the legal division, of which consisted of about 6 lawyers. It was only in 2002 that I became the legal advisor and became the head of all matters in UNRWA. The reason we're here, of course, is because UNRWA is very much in the news, and that has to do with the announcement by the Commissioner General that Philippe Lazzarini, on I think it was the 26th of January, seems like months ago, that the Israeli intelligence services had informed him that 12 of his employees in Gaza had been involved in the massacre of October the 7th. As a result of that, the and other people as well. I think the Israeli services indicate there were at least 190 actual combatants, operatives in Gaza from the UNRWA. In terms of what to do with UNRWA, the situation really is that Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan are perfectly happy with UNRWA, and therefore they are not pressing at all to do anything with UNRWA. The pressure for changing UNRWA is coming from Israel, and the pressure is on changing it in Gaza and changing it eventually perhaps in the West Bank. That seems to be clear that's what the Israeli authorities have in mind. But even they, as I said, are not planning to do this immediately. They're planning to do this in Gaza after the end of the war. And meanwhile, the military, even in Gaza, in the IDF, says that they don't want UNRWA to be suddenly shut down. So the situation now is that with these donations suspended, though, UNRWA maybe will shut down. Commissioner General said it will happen by the end of February. The United States has said that in order to continue its donations, there has to be fundamental reform in UNRWA, though that's not been explained exactly what they mean. And they've also indicated that pending the resumption of donations from the United States, they're thinking about donating monies to other organizations that are active in Gaza, such as the World Food Program. And I think they mentioned UNICEF also. But all of these countries, and I think there are more than 18 that have actually cut out their donations, which amounts to maybe 2/3 or so of the total amount of donations that UNRWA gets. All of them are thinking in terms of a pause as opposed to an end of UNRWA. And the existence of UNRWA really depends upon, of course, the countries in which it operates, but it also depends upon the funds. Given that the Israelis are the ones who are most pressing to end UNRWA and that they are not pressing to end it immediately, I think it's safe to assume that UNRWA will continue for some time. I don't know how long, and maybe not in Gaza, but it will continue. My position on this is the same as it was in 2009, shortly after I left UNRWA. And I wrote a long paper discussing UNRWA and what needed to be done. I wrote this for the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. There are a number of things that should be done. These things should have been done years ago. And at this particular point, when UNRWA is under pressure and people, donors in particular, are looking at it to see what's going on, I think they should be looking at these things. The first thing, and the most dramatic, of course, is the one that has been occasioned by the Commissioner General's announcement on the 26th of January. That is, UNRWA needs to eliminate terrorists and terrorist supporters from its employees. These are employees that are area staff as opposed to international staff. I've seen no indication that international staff have been involved in terrorist activity. UNRWA in Gaza consists of about 13,000 employees, of whom approximately 20 or 25 are international staff, that is, people who are not Palestinians. Everyone else are called area staff, and they are all, almost to a man or woman, Palestinians. So they first have to eliminate, they have to do the vetting, they need to get information from various and sundry sources, including Israel, but also including America, and to try to eliminate these people from their ranks. They need to do the same thing with beneficiaries. In other words, why should monies coming from donors go to benefit families that are involved with terrorism or supportive of terrorism? That's not what the intention of the United States Congress has been, certainly. UNRWA needs to consider using information, as I said, from other countries, particularly from donor countries, as to who these people might be, who these terrorist associated people might be. And they've refused to do that in the past. They've only used UN sources, and those are very, very, very limited. The next thing, after this initial and very important thing, is a broader and also very important reform, which is to limit UNRWA services to people who are actually refugees under the definition of the United Nations High Commission for Refugees. For instance, under that definition, people who have citizenship in another country are no longer refugees. And it's silly to call them refugees because they are under the protection of their own country. Those people should be removed from the roles of beneficiaries of UNRWA. Their definition includes anybody who's in the 5 areas where they operate: Gaza, West Bank, Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon, who meets their requirements and or who is a descendant on the male side of those people. But clearly, citizens should not be refugees, and those people that UNRWA calls refugees, who are citizens, mostly of Jordan, actually. Nearly 2 million of UNRWA's, I think they claim 5.9 million refugees now. Nearly 2 million of them, I think it's about 1.8 million, are in fact citizens of Jordan. And Jordan should be taking care of those. Doesn't mean that Jordan wouldn't need help, it wouldn't need foreign aid, i.e., for instance, if you transferred $200 million from UNRWA to Jordan, so that Jordan could be providing teaching and providing medical care and so on. There's nothing wrong with that if that's what if the donor nations wanted to do that.
James, if I may interrupt for a second, you just mentioned teaching.
Yes.
Was UNRWA school system was part of the initial intention of UNRWA scope? Because just beyond the security problems, there is a great deal of incitement in these schools, as much as Israel think, and this might be even a greater problem for the future.
The education is indeed something that I've identified as a problem. And you're right, education certainly wasn't included in 1950 when UNRWA came into existence. When UNRWA when it took charge of the refugees in 1950, it was a relief organization. The idea was to prevent people from dying, to give them food, give them tents, give them shelter, and that was the intent. There was no discussion of education. Over a period of years, that changed, and UNRWA began providing services beyond simply immediate relief. And the education is one of those, and the education is something I've identified as a problem. There are two aspects to that. The first one is the most obvious one, which many people have commented on, which is the teaching materials, the textbooks. The textbooks come from the national authorities, and in the West Bank and Gaza, that has been taken as the PA. And PA textbooks are
the Palestinian Authority.
Palestinian Authority, sorry, yes, Palestinian Authority. Those books are the most studied ones. There are also books in Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon, which are very little looked at, but probably are not much better. The PA textbooks contain a lot of material that shouldn't be in there. Anti-Semitism, anti-peace things, pro-jihadist type of language, certainly very anti-Israel. And there's no reason for them to be in there. The material that's in there, in many cases, is against the founding principles of the United Nations. UNRWA claims that they have to use these books because that's what the authorities tell them to use. And, you know, my response to that has always been, well, then just tell them you won't teach and see what happens. UNRWA has been unwilling to do that. It would be easy to fix this, by the way. All you have to do is say, go to the PA and say, look, we want the soft copy of this textbook. Give us the soft copy and we'll change it so it meets UN standards. But they've not been willing to do that. Another excuse they give is, well, if we teach it different things, then when our students go on to high school, which UNRWA does not provide high school in the West Bank and Gaza, then they won't be able to understand what's going on. And that's nonsense, of course. I mean, there's no such thing as Palestinian math and PA math and, you know, Israeli math and Syrian math. It's all the same math. And even the history is things that can be taught in a fair and open way and still allow people to be able to function in a Palestinian Authority text room, using their textbooks.
Before we'll continue, if I may ask Dr. Schwartz, Adi, what is your reflection on that matter of education and its importance before we get to all other matters regarding UNRWA?
Well, I think that, and that actually continues exactly what Mr. Lindsay has been saying. Everything that we have heard until now, and the fact that, you know, many attempts in the past to change and to reform UNRWA have not been successful, brings me again to the same conclusion that UNRWA is not a UN organization. It has indeed UN, its initials are UN, but it is a Palestinian organization. As Mr. Lindsay said, 99% or even 99.9% of Palestinians. We have seen, even after October 7th, opinion polls showing that perhaps 80% of Palestinians, both in the West Bank and in the Gaza Strip, support Hamas. Hamas's approval ratings have even gone beyond what they've been before October 7th, and there was even overwhelming support of the attacks themselves. So if 99% of UNRWA's personnel are Palestinian, then of course you will see so many Palestinians who support terror, and some of them who actually take up arms and fight. Now, these are the same people, these are the teachers of UNRWA. So when teachers enter the class, they are Palestinian with Palestinians' views pro-Hamas. Of course, they continue to teach the Palestinian narrative, which is again, you know, against the establishment of the State of Israel, sees Israel and Zionism as illegitimate, calls to fight them. And when you raise generation after generation, now it's fifth perhaps generation, eventually you will have some of them taking the extreme violent steps that we have seen. And by the way, they are not new. If you go back to 1972, to the Munich Olympics, the people, the terrorists who did that attacks were students of UNRWA. And by the way, we even know that's on the record that the people who recruited them went specifically to the refugee camps to find the most, you know, willing people to commit terror against Israel. So this is not a coincidence. This is a whole system which UNRWA embodies. There are more aspects that we can go into. Now you asked me only about the education, but the education is just again, all of these are just the symptoms of the disease. The disease is an organization which is its core meaning is to perpetuate the refugee problem and to continue the war against Israel. And that's only natural that some of those people will actually kill, rape, mutilate Israelis.
But you know, when the director of UNRWA was asked about the atrocities that UNRWA activists and employees were involved in, He said, I cannot control what they are doing after work hours. How do you treat it? And I'll address the very same question to James Lindsay right away.
Well, I have never heard any response which is more ridiculous than that. First of all, it contradicts the United Nations rules themselves. Anyone who is actually involved in violence and terrorism cannot work for a United Nations organization. That should, that goes without saying. Now, the fact that the United Nations body says such a thing, I think in itself is reason enough to, put an end to this organization. It makes no sense. It's ridiculous. The United Nations was supposed to promote peace, not only in Israel, all around the world. And if that's what he has to say, that only shows you that he knows very well that he has no control. But that is something that is unacceptable and should not be acceptable.
James?
I basically agree with Dr. Schwartz on this. I have a few little niggling things I'd like to point out.
Please go ahead.
I'm sorry?
Go ahead, please.
Yeah. I don't know exactly what the Commissioner General meant when he says he can't control people after work. The UNRWA rules themselves say that you can't have another job. If you have another job, you're supposed to tell the organization, and if you don't, then you can be disciplined. He may have simply meant, look, we don't send out investigators to find out what our staff are doing. There are 13,000 of them, and what the hell am I supposed to do in Gaza? The problem is that the international staff, the UN people, firstly, they're going to be sympathetic to Palestinians because that's what happens when you work for an aid organization. That doesn't mean that they're sympathetic toward what happened on October the 7th. But the problem is, and this is my other problem with education, is that the entire educational structure, with the exception of 2 or 3 or 4 people at the top in Gaza at the most, is going to be Palestinians. And if you go down to the teacher level, yes, there may be Palestinians who are pro-Hamas. I mean, there are a lot. The statistics I've seen, and I think I'm going from the same, probably the same poll that Dr. Schwartz is talking about. The thing I noticed in that was there was a big difference between the support for Hamas in the West Bank and the support in Gaza. I've always thought the support in Gaza would be greater, but this poll was taken some time after October the 7th, and people may not have been so happy with Hamas, because in Gaza, the figures I remember are 52% were supportive of Hamas in Gaza, and it was much, much higher in the West Bank, which hadn't been dealing with the IDF to the same extent. But my concern is that you have these few people in the headquarters in Gaza who are talking about education. They're sending out these remedial materials that are supposed to offset the problems in the textbooks. But who knows what's actually going down in the classroom itself? I don't think they know. I don't think they can know. And I don't think any teacher in the classroom in Gaza, and most certainly not since 2007 when Hamas took over the entire Gaza Strip, is going to be free to teach what UNRWA says. They're going to be free to teach what Hamas says and nothing else. And not doing what Hamas tells you is not healthy. In a terrorist organized area, if you disobey the terrorists, very, very bad things can happen to you. And I think that the teachers, at least half of them, according to the poll, and it's a reliable poll by a reputable pollster in the Palestinian areas, says 52% of them support Hamas. So right away, probably 52% of the teachers support Hamas. And the remainder, assuming that in fact the remainder doesn't support Hamas at all, they're going to do what Hamas says because Hamas has tremendous control over them. So
I think Dr. Schwartz
about it being a Palestinian organization is very largely true.
Yeah, I believe Dr. Schwartz, I see you are eager to get in here and elaborate more.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with what Mr. Lindsay has said, and he tells it in a very detailed and, comprehensive way. But I want to open up again a little bit because I think we are making the mistake of treating UNRWA as something which it is not. Again, you should not look at UNRWA as an aid agency. Yes, it also provides aid, but it's not an aid agency. It's a political tool to perpetuate the refugee problem and to continue the war against Israel. And by that, I mean the war of 1948. As Mr. Lindsay very well said, it was initially created to prevent starvation. Now, that has been achieved in a few months. And by the way, the United Nations or the United States and the West, who were behind the creation of UNRWA, considered it to be a temporary agency for 18 months because, 18 months should have been enough to prevent death and to provide food, etc. So why wasn't UNRWA closed down immediately after that? The target was achieved. I just want to give you an example. All around the world in that period, tens of millions of refugees were created in Europe, in Asia, in Korea. A United Nations organization called UNRWA, right, the K is for Korea, was created to take care and to prevent and even to resettle the refugees from the Korean War. Now, the Korean War was more devastating, much more devastating than the one we had here. There were more refugees, more dead people, more wounded, etc. South Korea, or the area of South Korea, was at the level, a standard of level of countries in Africa. And look at it now, 75 years later, or even 30 or 40 years later, South Korea is one of the most successful, rich, etc. Why? Because the United Nations took it seriously. It resettled the refugees. And by the way, the problem here is not with the United Nations and not with the Koreans, but the question is why it did not happen with the case of the Palestinians. And the answer is politics. The reason is that the Palestinian refugees did not want to be resettled. For them to be resettled meant that they don't have any problem anymore. They don't have any open wound with the state of Israel. It meant that they will continue with their lives, continue and trying to reestablish their lives. And this is something that they were not willing to do. The reason behind the continuation of UNRWA was political. Now, this is not something that I am saying. The vision of UNRWA as a political tool is something that the heads of the Palestinian society have been saying after October 7th. In fact, they have said that in the last 2 weeks. After those Western countries, Western donors, decided to stop for now the funding of UNRWA, I just want to read you very short, a few sentences of what Palestinians themselves have said and how they see it. They don't see it as an aid agency. They see it, listen to this. So a statement issued by
who is the person who
I will say,
okay.
And I can send you the quotes
Thank
later.
you.
So the first one is a statement issued, all the quotes are from memory, from the website of memory.
Okay.
A statement issued by the PA presidency. Okay, that's the PA, that's Fatah, that's Ramallah, that's not Hamas. Condemned the Israel oppressive campaign against UNRWA, whose aim is to eliminate the issue of the Palestinian refugees. Okay? So the Palestinians see the attack, right, on UNRWA, not as a problem of lack of aid, but as a political problem against the refugees. Okay, PA Prime Minister Muhammad Shtaya, again, PA, Fatah, that's the moderate people who are in Ramallah, said that UNRWA embodies the accumulating memory of the suffering of the Palestinian refugees. Throughout its years of activity, UNRWA has been a source of hope for the Palestinian refugees for returning to their homes. Again, one more quote, Fatah. Fatah asserted that the refugee issue will remain the crux of the Palestinian cause. And I want to read to you, this would be the last quote from a Palestinian author, again, writing in Al-Quds. These are not people affiliated with Hamas, so I'm trying to show you how consistent and overwhelming perception this is in the Palestinian society. So the name of the author is Bahar Achal, and he says that for the Palestinians, the UN Relief and Works Agency, that's UNRWA, was never an end in itself, but rather a means to achieve the goals. That is the main goal for which UNRWA was established, to actualize the return of all the refugees. And listen to this admission. Many of the services that this organization once provided have diminished and decreased, and many refugees no longer benefit from this international organization. But the fact of its existence has international political, moral, and legal impact on the refugees' historical right of return. Now, this is not Adi Schwartz saying, this is not the Israeli government saying, these were all Palestinian quotes. So what I'm trying to say is that at a certain moment, the international community, and by this I mean the donors, the Western donors, should ask themselves, what are they doing and how are they doing it? If they want to perpetuate a war between Israelis and Palestinians, then by all means, continue funding UNRWA. Let them dream about the return of some 6 million, as Mr. Lindsay has said, some 6 million refugees into the state of Israel, which means, of course, that there will be no Jewish state. This is what UNRWA does. This is how the Palestinians see it. This is what they understand by UNRWA. And growing an endless, artificial, exponential number of refugees. And by the way, Mr. Lindsay has touched upon one of the issues. All the refugees in Jordan, of course, if you would apply international standards, as he explained very well, because they acquired new citizenship, should not be called refugees. But I want to add another 2 million registered refugees by UNRWA. And these are people who live in the Palestinians, who live in the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank. Now, consider this. The main, I would say, feature of a refugee is, first of all, that he's outside of his country. When you open the international definition of what constitutes a refugee, it's someone who at the moment of being a refugee is obviously outside of his country. Now, I want to ask, people who live currently in Gaza, or in Rafah, or in Ramallah for that matter, they are Palestinians. They live in Palestinian cities. Whatever our future dreams of political solution, they certainly live in what they consider to be Palestine. So these are people who reside in Palestine and still are refugees from Palestine, okay? Now, they know which Palestine they mean. They mean Haifa and Jaffa and Ramla, but the state of Israel is a nation which is recognized by the United Nations to be a sovereign state. So the question is, you can't be living in Serbia and at the same time be a refugee from Serbia. Only in the case of the Palestinians. There is no precedent, there is no parallel for that. That is, again, more than 2 million people who received the message, and their descendants forever, who received the message, which is a very basic tenet, as I just told you, of the Palestinian narrative, that one day they will go back to Haifa and Ramla and Jaffa. And my question to the Western donors who contradict their own foreign policy. On the one hand, Germany, Brussels, the UK, Washington, we have just seen today more reports about their push or their pressure to promote the two-state solution. So that's on the one hand. And on the other hand, you pour billions of dollars each year into an organization who perpetuates, right, and continues the conflict, and whose mere core existence means no Jewish state. So this is an agency which contradicts foreign policy of the Western donors. And I hope that we can make the message, we can bring the message through that this makes no sense. And if you really want to move one day towards peace in this area, UNRWA has to go. There are other alternatives. There are other solutions that you can find, and the sooner the better.
Thank you for that, Adi. And I see we have a question from Yossi Lemkovich, our colleague from Brussels. And I do urge you, ladies and gentlemen, please, if you have any questions or remark, please, you are most welcome to use the chat facility in this Zoom meeting and ask us. Yossi, please unmute yourself. You are talking about some news coming from Switzerland, I see.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, there are calls for Lazzarini resignation, not only from Israel, but also in Switzerland. You know that he's also from Switzerland. There are calls to resign, by the way, because of his lack of credibility after what happened, and especially because what he said during a press conference in Brussels after a meeting of a development minister, he said that UNRWA has no mandate to look at what happens under the Gaza Strip. I mean, regarding what happens, the tunnels that are built and the Hamas infrastructure that is built under UNRWA facilities. So my question is, should he resign? No.
Mr. Lindsay, please.
I don't think he's doing a good job. I think he should resign. The problem is that these people become identified with the Palestinian cause, as Dr. Schwartz has said. There is a Palestinian cause, and the people in UNRWA, I won't say all. I mean, I know not all because I was there once, but the majority certainly favor whatever the Palestinian line is, and that happens with the commissioners general. I've written about things the commissioners general say that are problematical. It was one of the ones I wrote about was pushing for Hamas. Well, there was a period when the quartet was discussing Gaza and what to do with Gaza. And they wouldn't talk to Hamas because Hamas insisted on the genocide, insisted on eliminating Israel, one of the states of the United Nations. And she was insisting that, no, they have to deal with the Hamas because Hamas is part of the people and you don't want to break the people up, which of course also is the same thing that you hear from the PA now too. They are also saying that if there is another government formed, Hamas must be part of it because they are part of the Palestinian ethos, the part of the Palestinian people.
Thank you. And we have two questions. Please go ahead, David, please.
I also want to say something. I think that, I mean, I can certainly understand the anger towards Mr. Lazzarini, but there is a problem here on the part of the Swiss parliament because they think that this is a bug. And actually, it's a feature of UNRWA. So it's not a personal question. You can get rid of Mr. Lazzarini, but the next one or the last one were the same. So there's a structural problem here, which runs much deeper than the question of who actually will be the head of UNRWA. And I think that, especially if we talk about the day after the conditions, it's not a question of who, it's a question of what. The what should be, or the content should be, A, there are no more refugees in Gaza. Since that, they don't need a refugee agency. I make a differentiation between an aid agency and a refugee agency. Aid is that you simply give aid. Refugee is a political issue. Now, by inflating the number of refugees, again, this is the core issue. They have no right of return. They are not refugees. Otherwise, there's a reason why Gaza is every 1 or 2 years we have a war in Gaza. Are we going to perpetuate this again? Are we going to change UNRWA to some kind of UNQLT or something? We'll get the same, thing in a year or two. You have to tackle the root problem, which is the ideology of the Palestinians. The ideology of the Palestinians is that the state of Israel should not exist. Now, as long as you ignore that and keep on, spending. Now, consider this. The fact that there is aid in Gaza made it much easier for Hamas. So there was someone, United Nations, right? United States, who took care of education, of health. This is something that a normal government usually does, right? So Hamas was free of all that. They had all the time and all the money that they wanted to go underneath and plan how to kill Jews. So there was a division of labor, if you want.
Actually, if I'm not mistaken, there was one of the Hamas leaders who answered the question in Al Jazeera, and
we even
when
said
he
that.
was asked, why don't you take care of the Palestinians in Gaza? If I'm not mistaken, his answer was, "This is UNRWA's problem, not ours."
Exactly. This is their vision. Okay, let's say this is their vision, but why the United Nations or the international community supports that? Can you imagine a more destructive message that you give? You're free of responsibility. Yeah, we know you're a terror organization. You can continue plan and execute terror, and we'll continue to give you education. And why? Well, what is the purpose? And we have seen for the last 76 years, it doesn't work. It only makes things worse. So again, it's not a question. It's not a personal question of Mr. Lazzarini. There are good reasons for him to resign. That's of course, but it's not enough. That's what I'm trying to say.
Thank you both. And let's go to the questions we have from our colleagues. I'll try to make it by the order of asking them. David from Italy, can you please unmute yourself and ask your question, please?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the awesome opportunity. So I'll play devil's advocate here, because before you said that it's a very peculiar situation that Palestinian refugees are considered refugees even within the borders of the Palestinian Authority. So, for example, in the Gaza Strip. So my question, that is something that I might get asked a lot, is considering now the destructions of buildings, of houses, all those displaced Palestinians who are now homeless, basically, what will be their status? Like, will there still be the need to consider them refugees, or to invent a new status? Like, what will be their fate now? Because at the eyes of the world, now they are going to be seen even more as refugees.
Thank you. James?
Well, don't know they'd be seen more as refugees. They would be seen more as people in desperate need. People have been internally displaced and need assistance to go back to where they were, but that's not the same as being a refugee. What Dr. Schwartz has been talking about has been that they are not really refugees. People are, I mean, you can argue that, I think it's 138 or 139 members of the General Assembly of the UN have recognized the state of Palestine. And if there is a state of Palestine, then you can't be a refugee, as Dr. Schwartz points out, from your own country. If you're in there and you're part of that country. So I don't think it's going to increase feelings of refugeehood, but it's going to increase feelings that people in Gaza are under terrible circumstances.
Moshe Appelblatt has a question to you as well, please.
Can I add something?
Okay, thank you very much. I think, okay, you've spoken so much. Can I ask a question?
No. With your permission, we'll have Adi finish his words, please. Adi, go ahead.
Okay, so I want David, your name, the person who asked the question.
David.
Yes.
Okay, David, it's a very important differentiation. As you just said, the world will see them more as refugees. There's two separate issues. One is that if someone is in need, for example, tomorrow there's a tsunami or an earthquake in Turkey or in Haiti, okay? Houses are destroyed. It is obviously a disaster. People are in need of food, of whatever, right? That is something completely different to be a refugee, okay? People can stay inside Haiti and still be in need. Now, in terms of legal terms, these people who had to move inside their own territory, okay? For example, their house was destroyed. These people are called all over the world displaced persons, actually internally displaced persons, okay? These are people who did not cross an international recognized border. Now, I want to, first of all, to your legal matter, but I want to add another dimension and to ask the question, why are they in need? Why? And I must admit that from everything that I saw in the last 4 months, I didn't get the impression that the Palestinians are somehow helpless or incapable. I saw a very sophisticated organization which is being able to confront the IDF, which is considered to be quite a strong army for 4 months. They built tunnels, which everybody says were something like the subway or the tube of London. Military experts said that they haven't seen for many years such a sophisticated in terms of engineering. And so the problem is not lack of capacity or lack of, ability. The problem is a question of priorities. The problem is that the Palestinians, and again, I'm not making that a difference between the separation between Gaza, UNRWA, and Hamas is an artificial separation. They are much more connected and intertwined. Now, the problem is this set of priorities. Instead of actually building above the ground schools, hospitals, things to actually promote the life of Palestinians, they chose, that was their choice, to build army, tunnel, missiles, everything that you need to conduct a war against Israel. So again, I'm not sure that actually our problem here is a question of more aid. The question is the fundamental change in their priorities.
Thank you. Mr. Appelblatt, please. I see you have 2 questions.
Yes, thank you very much, Tal. I think it was very interesting to listen to both the speakers. And I would like first to ask Mr. Lindsay, who worked with UNRWA many years ago, and you wrote this paper, as you said, when you left back in 2009, with interesting ideas, and they seem very relevant now, I must say. So my question is, are you optimistic about the 2 United Nations investigation which have been launched now, the one by United Nations internal review services, and the other one, a so-called review panel, to look into, let's say, the shortcomings and the problems with UNRWA. And the other question is to Mr. Schwarz, because you may be right that UNRWA was supposed to be a temporary solution, but I'm not wrong. I think it became permanent, and that is because the refugee problem has not been solved yet. So UNRWA exists, let's say, to support them and also to provide development aid, and not only humanitarian aid, pending a solution to your refugee problem. So my question to you is now, hasn't also Israel itself somehow, let's say, accepted UNRWA? You didn't do anything, let's say, to eliminate or do something about your refugee camps, which are located in the occupied West Bank. That's one question. And they also some way, as we know, accepted Hamas, as obviously also UNRWA has been obliged to do when it's operating in the Gaza Strip. So what is your response to that? Thank you.
Thank you very much. James, please.
Well, there are a lot of questions in there. I'll try to answer the ones that I can remember. First one I recall had to do with the outcome of the investigations that are ongoing. And I'm sure Dr. Schwarz would agree with me that this is not going to make much difference to anything about UNRWA. It may indeed point out that there should be more oversight, there should be more investigations, more vetting, as I've suggested should be done. But firstly, what they're going to get at most is they're going to identify people who actually were involved. That's going to be based entirely upon like pretty much signals intelligence from the Israelis. And then maybe they're going to be able to identify people who are also Hamas operatives, and maybe they can fire them. They're not going to easily fire people who are supportive of Hamas, because they would say, oh, this is political discrimination and so on. I don't agree with that, but I think that's what we'll hear. And it really depends entirely upon the donors developing a backbone. And I don't know that that's going to happen. I wish it would happen. I complain about it. Everything I write has to do about complaining about UNRWA needing to do this, needing to do that. And ultimately, aid organizations are not designed to live forever. They're designed to take care of the immediate problem, and then people are supposed to relocate. They're supposed to stop being refugees. It happens not everywhere, but in the vast majority of places, it does happen. And there needs to be more done here. And you know, the Americans have talked about some sort of a state in Gaza. In fact, truth is, the Israelis are talking about some sort of a state in Gaza. It's not going to be a completely independent state that can do anything at once, but it's going to be a state that can take over taking care of the people within its borders. I think that's what we should be hoping there.
Yeah.
Refugee camps, just briefly, let me tell you about the
please.
When I was writing, I've always thought that people should move out of the refugee camps. People in the refugee camps now are not all refugees, even under UNRWA's definition. And UNRWA has money that they can use to encourage people to move out. They can support mortgages for people who want to live somewhere else outside of a camp. There's no reason to try to preserve the camps. Okay, those are the two questions I wrote down.
Thank you so much. Adi, can you address the Israeli aspect of the refugees Mr. Appelblatt asked about?
So, unfortunately, I agree with you. I think that Israel has done a poor job on perhaps, not in the beginning, by the way. In the 50s and the 60s, Israel understood very well the problems of the refugee presence, but until 1967, Israel had no control over any territory. The problem is that for the last, I don't know, 10 or 20 years, perhaps even more, the overall thinking in Israel is very tactical. The understanding or the thinking is that UNRWA somehow buys quiet. Now, this something that also was the ideology behind letting the Qataris give money to Hamas. That was the whole idea. You know, let us try to buy quiet with money. So if we close down UNRWA or if we, you know, rock the boat, there will somehow be an intifada. This is something that I heard myself. Whenever I, together with Einat, we tried many times to, you know, talk to Israeli officials and explain to them the catastrophe that is, you know, with the presence of UNRWA. And we've always been told, no, you know, they understand the problem. They understand that this touches directly at the issue of the right of return, but they were afraid to rock the boat. Now, unfortunately, the boat was rocked very hardly on October the 7th. So, you know, what we have been trying to avoid, so people say that UNRWA has a calming effect on it. Now, we have not seen that. UNRWA was unable to do anything to prevent 7th of October. And as we see, they now say that they have no control over that. So I hope, again, to your question, that Israel will demand as one of the, immediately perhaps, but certainly for the day after, that the political issue must be addressed. There are no refugees in Gaza, no refugee camps, no refugee agency. And the condition for receiving aid is that people understand that they're not refugees, they don't return anywhere, and that part is behind us.
Thank you, Adi. And we're going further to John from Ireland. Please unmute yourself and ask your question. John, are you with us?
Good morning. Good morning.
Yeah,
can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now. Please go ahead.
Super. Thank you for an interesting presentation. And I'm sorry, my question is so parochial to my own country, but Mr. Lazzarini is actually in Dublin this morning, where he is gratefully shaking hands with the Irish Prime Minister, who is announcing an additional 20 million in funding for UNRWA on an annual basis. Now, obviously in Ireland, to provide some context, as might be suggested by the fact that I'm the only Irish journalist on this call, the press coverage has been overwhelmingly highlighting the plight of Palestinian civilians on foot of the military operation, and there is, I suspect, great public desire to provide aid to civilians. So my question really is to Mr. Lindsay is what should the Irish government be demanding in exchange for that funding, number one, and number two, is there a better and more appropriate way to provide the humanitarian assistance that many Irish people, and indeed I suspect many people across the world, want to provide to those who they're seeing on their television screens suffering the impacts of the war?
So thank you for the question, and not less for the information. This is online educating us. James, please, can you refer to the question?
Well, I think Ireland is seen as being overwhelmingly pro-Palestinian, so I doubt the government's going to do a whole lot. On the other hand, one of the best of the people who was running the Gaza operation was an Irish former military officer named John Ging, who in fact is very resistant to terrorist pressure. If the government in Ireland were to strengthen its willingness to try to put an end to the refugee situation, then of course they can do as Dr. Schwartz has suggested. They should be giving money through other formats, and the Americans themselves have said, and true, the American government is under pressure because the American Congress is very upset about UNRWA and is threatening to completely defund it. And so the Americans are thinking about providing assistance to Gaza through things like the World Food Program or UNICEF, and they'll probably find some others. Maybe they'll get USAID in there, something like that. So yes, there are other ways to do it. And if the Irish government were to suddenly do a 180-degree turn and decide that they wanted to support other organizations, there are other organizations that will be building themselves up if they are given the funds to do that, and if the funds are taken away from UNRWA in order to fund these other organizations like the World Food Program, which already has a presence in Gaza. It would be expanding that presence.
Thank you. Adi, would you like to add?
No, two things. One is that, again, your readers, I know they think they want to help the Palestinians, but what they're actually doing, and again, I'll send you what Palestinians officials are saying, they're actually perpetuating the war. So Irish readers must know that what they're actually, with all their good intentions, they're actually perpetuating the war. In more practical terms, it's exactly what Mr. Lindsay said. The World Food Program is already there. So you have many ways to provide aid, actual relief aid, other than through UNRWA and without adding to the political problem of the refugees.
Thank you. And we are getting out of time, so we'll go to our final question by David Price. If you can please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Thank you, and thank you for this briefing. UNRWA was set up in the Cold War context, where the Soviet Union wanted to cause a maximum amount of difficulties in the West. And then the European Union took over as a major donor for UNRWA. And this was in 1973. And why did it happen? It happened because of the oil weapon was used by Arab OPEC. And they said, unless you supported the UNRWA framework, we will stop supplying oil energy to Europe, and there were basically total embargoes. So my question is, what can be done within the EU nowadays to reassess this, what was blackmail, political blackmail at the time? The whole of the EU's energy dependence has changed. And isn't it time for a political reassessment of why this whole situation arose?
Thank you, David. James Lindsay, please.
I'm not a political historian, but of course that's true. The Arab countries, which controlled a lot of the oil, most of the oil then, did have the ability to blackmail or to pressure other countries, but that's certainly not the case now, and I don't think it's that important a factor. The factor is that there are people in governments who are frozen in this concept of supporting UNRWA without making any demands on UNRWA, and I think it's not a good policy.
And just before I turn to Adi, I would like you to conclude with addressing an issue of some people are saying, well, maybe UNRWA is not the right tool. Maybe it should be closed, but not now, not during the war. How would you react to that claim, James?
Well, this is not really something for me to decide. This is something for the Israelis to decide. They're the ones who are occupying Gaza. They're the ones who are, presumably at the end, it appears like they're going to try to sort of denazify Gaza, which I don't know whether that's going to be successful or not. But the Israeli military is saying, look, we don't want to have a huge crisis in Gaza right now because it's going to interrupt our ability to prosecute the war. If people are starving, then everybody will get really excited and we won't be able to finish the war the way we want to. So
Thank you.
agree with that.
Yeah, thank you for that. Adi Schwartz, your final comments.
Right, so two comments. First of all, about the EU. Yes, you're right. I think that the biggest problem is that European countries, and again, Ireland, many other countries, they in their mind are doing good things. They think they provide aid to people who need aid. I'm sure that this is their intention. The only problem is that it's not true. What they actually do is they perpetuate the conflict. So I think that the message should be made in Brussels that there's a political dimension to UNRWA, and this is why it exists. That's one thing. Regarding what should be done now, I'll tell you, and this is my view. I know, as Mr. Lindsay is correct. The Israeli government and the Israeli IDF, they say that they don't want to jeopardize, or they fear that the military targets would be jeopardized. I'll tell you my concern. Now everybody says that UNRWA must continue because they provide aid. So my question is this: right now there is no catastrophe in the West Bank, not in Jordan. Why do we have UNRWA there? Until 7th of October, UNRWA was mainly an education system. And then we didn't want to dismantle UNRWA because it brings us quiet. Now we can't do without it. And I'm sure that the day after we'll hear that we need UNRWA to reconstruct Gaza. So it's like the sun, it always, every day it rises in the east. That's my concern. If I'm sure that the dismantlement of UNRWA would be in 1 month, in 2 months, I'll buy it, okay? But my fear is that this is something that's not just an excuse, you understand? UNRWA is like a chameleon. When you need aid, it provides aid. When you need health, they provide health. Everything because they still want to continue. For them, it's not the aid. For the Palestinians, it's not the aid, it's not the education, it's not the health, it's the refugee cards, it's the right of return, it's the ideology.
So although I said it was the last question, I have another one which refers really to what you've just said. Juan, can you unmute yourself and ask your question? Because I think it's very interesting regarding to what Dr. Schwartz just said. Juan, are you able to unmute yourself? No, so I will ask. The question is, can UNRWA continue to operate, Dr. Schwartz, in Gaza and provide social services if Hamas would be removed from power?
There's no connection between the two things. UNRWA provides services in the West Bank where Hamas is not in power. So,
and you think they are more effective to the cause of its establishment there, or not as well?
Again, there's a misunderstanding. Their purpose is to perpetuate the refugee status. Again, I can't stress it hard. They do it perfectly well in the West Bank. Now, one should ask himself, why do we have parallel systems of education? You have UNRWA schools and PA schools. The whole idea of the Oslo process was to someday, be on the road to a nation-building process. And here we are, 30 years later, you still have two systems. So A, it has nothing to do with Hamas. Yeah, it can continue operating. And to your question, whether it serves its purpose, again, define purpose. If you think that their purpose is humanitarian or something like that, no, they do a terrible job. If you think like the Palestinians, that this is a political tool, then they do a fantastic job. In 1948, you had 700,000 refugees. Now you have 6 million, right? Every CEO will tell you that this is a great success. Of course, it's detrimental to the lives of both Palestinians and Israelis, but again, it only depends on what you define as your goal.
Thank you so much, both of you, Mr. James Lindsay and Dr. Adi Schwartz. It was very enlightening. I must admit, even for me, that I thought I know all the details. You really enriched us very much. So thank you for your knowledge. Thank you for your courtesy and letting us share this knowledge. I would like to thank all my colleagues in APA for arranging this brief. And I hope to see you in one of our next APA special briefings upon the situation. Thank you so much and have a better day. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you.